Friday, November 12th edition of the Carolina Weather Video. I'm meteorologist Matthew East here with you. Another fantastic weekend forecast for us upcoming. And I'm going to get into a lot of things. We'll talk about next week, and I'll talk more about what the potential holds for the Thanksgiving week, the following week. And yeah, Thanksgiving less than 2 weeks away. It's on the doorstep here. Let's show you what's happening. This is a look from 5 o'clock this morning. The city of Charlotte, that's the Charlotte skyline. It was a clear, crisp morning out there all across the region. Very quiet, chilly temperatures still over the eastern United States. We continue to have some cooler air bleeding down the eastern side of the mountains from an area of high pressure that's building down the eastern seaboard. A nice push of milder air back in the plain states. Ahead of an advancing cold front, which is right about there. Behind the front, some fairly chilly air. In terms of precipitation, there's the radar this morning. Pretty moisture-packed system over the nation's midsection gearing up. And this is going to wind up being a pretty decent snow producer. The little snow back in the north, in the western parts of the Oklahoma Panhandle and northeastern New Mexico. But the snow will really crank up in this region, and that is where there are winter storm watches up from northwestern parts of Iowa on into parts of Minnesota and into northern Wisconsin, including the Minneapolis and St. Paul areas. The snow will really kick into gear by tomorrow morning, Saturday morning up that way. And it could be over 6 inches of wet snow in some parts of that winter storm watch area, again, including the Twin Cities. Now, here's the upper air chart today. And notice the ridging, very prevalent still over the eastern seaboard. And like I mentioned earlier in the week, even though you look at this upper air chart, you think it's very, very warm. It's just not the case because that area of high pressure underneath is bleeding down some of that cooler air. So you have to look at the whole profile of the atmosphere to kind of figure out what's going on. And here's how the pattern changes as we get into next week. This is Tuesday morning, and you're looking at a pretty good trough here over the middle part of the country. Now, it's not an overly sharp trough, kind of a broad-based trough pulling down some cooler air into the eastern part of the country. And we'll feel some of that by the end of next week. Now, let's take it day by day, and then I'll talk about Thanksgiving week. First of all, today, beautiful conditions, albeit a few degrees cooler than yesterday. A lot of mid to upper 60s for highs around the Piedmont today. There's that system gearing up in the plains. As we get into Saturday early afternoon, that low is centered over northwestern parts of Illinois. And the snow is really cranking back on the cold side of that system from Iowa into Minnesota and northern Wisconsin. Another beautiful day here across the southeast. Saturday highs in the upper 60s, even some low 70s, and still looks like essentially full sunshine. Now, we'll begin to see some high clouds creeping in Sunday, but Sunday will still be dry. Maybe in the westernmost mountains a shower very late Sunday, but the Piedmont will be dry Sunday. Highs again upper 60s to lower 70s. Now, Monday, clouds will roll in, and I think there's a chance by later Monday. This is the chart by 7 o'clock in the evening Monday. I think there's some chance that we could see a couple showers creeping in late Monday, but it still looks like Tuesday is the day where the bulk of the rain will pull through with this next system. So I'll mention rain Tuesday. Highs probably lower side of the 60s, maybe some mid-60s Tuesday. And then the midweek period looks pretty docile. A lot of sunshine builds back in for Wednesday and Thursday. Wednesday, we're probably looking at highs still in the low to mid-60s. But Thursday, pretty good blast of colder air moves in, and we'll really feel that as we get into Friday with that high pressure right overhead by Friday night. So it looks like Friday will be another day with highs likely in the 50s and some lows in the 30s, maybe even some 20s for lows again. If not by Friday morning, then by Saturday morning of next week. Now let's talk about what happens beyond. This is from the 0Z run of the GFS, and this is valid Thursday morning of next week, the 18th. And this is the key feature to note, and this is where some really significant differences arise in the modeling. The GFS still indicating a pretty good trough or even a closed low on some runs. It's off the southwest Canadian coast. The GFS then builds southward. Here's a look at the result of that. And because, let me just kind of show you again what happens. Because of this pattern the GFS has, it digging that trough off the west coast, you end up with essentially a zonal flow across the southern U.S. as we get into Thanksgiving week. So this is Sunday evening as we head into the Thanksgiving week on the GFS. But even the GFS, with it handling the feature like that, eventually gets the cold air certainly in place across the northern two-thirds of the country. You have the polar vortex there sitting just over the Canadian border by the time you get to Thanksgiving evening. And even taking the GFS verbatim, now this is Monday morning of Thanksgiving week at the surface. And I mean, this is brutally cold air that's in Canada and spilling into the northern Rockies here. And by the time you go out to 384 hours on the 0Z run of the GFS, here we are Saturday evening of Thanksgiving weekend. And this is brutal stuff here. That is a 1044 millibar Arctic high. And I mean, that is frigid cold over the Great Lakes and the northern plains, and it's getting pretty darn cold here, even down to around I-40. So that's the GFS. Let me show you one more chart before I wrap up the video here. And this is that chart I like to show you, the day 8 to 10 mean of the upper air pattern up at 500 millibars. European model on the left, GFS on the right. A lot of similarities between them. And you look here, some pretty big blocking, pretty nice blocking up around Alaska on both models. Pretty good blocking around Greenland as well. And so the result is you get some form of cross-polar flow, and that allows that very cold air. And by the way, these are the charts, of course, for the end of next week into the following weekend. And so the result is you get some very cold air that moves into North America. And so when you're dealing with that magnitude of cold air, it really most times it's just a matter of time before that plunges down into our area. Now the specifics of when I'm not ready to commit to yet, but I think at some point sooner or later this month, we're going to get into that significantly colder air. Just watch next week. As we go through next week, you'll see that really frigid air building from Canada and bleeding down into the northern U.S., and we'll see how that unfolds as we get into the following week, which is, of course, Thanksgiving week. All right, that's it for today's edition of the video. Next edition will be bright and early Monday morning. Have a great weekend, and God bless.